My wife told me, "We're just friends," while her secret lover smirked beside her. She laughed in my face thinking I'd never notice. She whispered that it was nothing, just a fling, as if our years together meant nothing. Melissa smiled, confident I had no idea, but I had been watching, waiting, and planning every move. I had every email, every message, every photo saved. By the time she faced the judge, the life she had taken for granted had disappeared before her eyes. What happened next in that courtroom will leave you speechless. Please subscribe, like, comment, and watch till the ending to share this interesting story. I spent the night pretending to sleep while the house hummed with the quiet, ordinary noises of a life I'd believed in. The kettle cooling on the stove, the distant siren on the street, Melissa's breath even beside me. I wasn't sleeping. I lay there and let my mind rewind through the small scenes that had once made our marriage feel solid. The night she fell asleep on my shoulder in that freezing hospital waiting room while her father had surgery, the way she'd balled the hem of her cardigan when she laughed, the time I sold a client a small piece of my own steak so we could afford the first floor of our house. Those moments had built a quiet ledger of trust in my head. Tonight they felt like marks on a paper I'd been asked to sign in blood. By morning I had a plan that had nothing to do with shouting or slamming doors. Anger is loud and obvious. I wanted the opposite. I needed proof, clarity, something that would remove any excuse she, or he, could hide behind. I called Lewis before I called anyone else. Lewis and I had been friends since university. He'd helped me on projects when I was starting out, bending rules where the law stood undecided because an architect sometimes has to see the structure nobody else imagines. He owed me nothing and everything. If anyone could quietly open the curtains on what was happening, it was him. When Lewis answered, he was at the other end of the country on a site visit, but I could hear the concrete mixer behind his voice, that low, grinding soundtrack he always had. "You sound calm," he said. "That's not good." I told him I wanted eyes on Melissa's phone, on her calendar, on anything that could show me where she was when she said she was elsewhere. I didn't use the word cheating. I didn't want to give him the shape of my fury. He asked once, "You sure?" And I told him yes. That was the first concession I made to this plan. I would not be hasty. I'd be exact. While we worked, old memories surfaced, sharp like the cut of a chisel. Melissa at university, scraping for coins, sleeping on a futon in rooms rented by students, telling me she would never go back to that life. I remember the night her father called, voice breaking, asking if we could help with a hospital bill. I remember writing the transfer under a pseudonym to keep her from feeling shame. She cried and called me ridiculous. It was foolish, perhaps, I gave because I loved, but those small, secret acts were the mortar that glued our house together in my mind. If she wanted to throw that away for a year of stolen dinners and smirks across linen tablecloths, she deserved to have the record of it laid bare. Lewis didn't use dramatic tools. He moved through human channels. A friend who owed him a favor, a barista who'd seen Melissa's coffee orders, an old colleague still employed at Mark's office who would share a schedule attachment if asked casually. Within 2 days the picture blurred into an outline I could finally read. Melissa had been in meetings in Manchester 3 times last month. Those meetings meant late nights at a hotel 2 train stops from Mark's flat. There were receipts for dinners charged to a corporate card that had been flagged under Mark's name. There were photographs sent between 2 accounts that were supposed to be private. I kept everything at arm's length. I printed the emails and the receipts, not to light fires with them yet, but so they'd exist in ink and paper, heavier than pixels, more difficult to dismiss as a mistake. Somewhere in those printed pages was the phrase I had always promised myself I would never say aloud. She had chosen him. The memory of paying for her father's operation flashed again as a small, terrible thing. The debt of gratitude I'd carried like a stone in my pocket now felt like a stone tied to both our ankles, dragging us down. That evening I sat in my study, the printed pages spread like a crime scene, and I discovered the second truth. I had resources she didn't know about. Years of designing boutique townhouses and quietly reinvesting every bonus into small developments under a trust. Not flashy, not public, but real. I'd hidden them because I'd outgrown the need to prove myself. Now that discretion would become my advantage. I'd planned the structural integrity of buildings for a living. Now I would use the same patience and precision to engineer a collapse that left no question about who had built and who had torn down. I moved slowly then, methodical as an architect drafting a final plan. The letter would be written, yes, but only when the scaffolding was in place. For now, I gathered evidence, traced patterns, and let the city hum outside like a clock, counting down the exact moments I'd need to pull the final beam. When I closed the study light that night, I felt the shape of the next steps in my bones, cold but sure. The next few days felt like walking through a film where everyone else followed the script but I'd been handed blank pages. Melissa moved around the house as if nothing had changed, the faint scent of her jasmine perfume trailing behind her, her soft hum as she made coffee, the light touch of her hand on my shoulder before she left for work. If I hadn't seen those emails, I might have believed her. But once you know the truth, you start noticing the cracks in every word. One morning, while she was in the shower, I glanced at her phone left charging on the nightstand. The wallpaper had changed. It used to be a photo of us at Lake Windermere, wind in our hair, both smiling like we'd conquered the world together. Now it was just a plain, dark background, the kind people use when they have something to hide. A single notification blinked on the screen. Ryan, can't stop thinking about last night. I didn't need to open it. The words burned enough without context. When she came out of the shower, wrapped in her towel, I smiled. Got plans tonight? I asked casually. She paused, studying me for a heartbeat too long. Just dinner with Claire. You remember her, from the office? I nodded, pretending to sip my coffee. Yeah. Say hi for me. She smiled, relieved, and kissed my cheek before disappearing into the closet. I watched her walk away and thought about the years I spent building her comfort. The late nights drafting designs to make sure our mortgage was paid, the extra shifts when she lost her job for 6 months, the times I told her she didn't need to worry about money because I'd handle it. All of that now felt like I'd handed someone a loaded weapon and told them to aim carefully. By evening, Lewis called again. I've got something you'll want to see, he said. I met him at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, the kind where no one remembers faces. He slid a brown envelope across the table. Inside were photos, Melissa and Ryan walking out of a hotel, her laughing as he brushed a strand of hair off her face, their hands brushing in that unmistakable way that belonged to lovers, not friends. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m. That was the same night she texted me that she was stuck late in traffic. My chest tightened, but not from pain, from resolve. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I went home early, lit a small fire in the living room, and stared at the flickering shadows across our wedding picture on the mantel. We looked happy there, two people who believed love was enough. The memory felt like a lie now, and yet it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. It just felt hollow. When Melissa returned, she looked surprised to see me awake. Hey, she said softly, you're up late. Couldn't sleep, I replied. How was dinner? She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Good. Claire says hi. I smiled. That's nice of her. She nodded, kissed my forehead, and disappeared upstairs. I sat there for a long time, listening to her footsteps fade. And in that silence, I made the decision that would change everything. If she could lie this easily, she deserved to be caught in a truth so brutal it would leave her with nothing to hide behind. I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't beg, and I wouldn't break. I'd let her build her fantasy until the walls couldn't hold anymore, and then I'd pull one brick and let it all fall. So the next morning, when she mentioned she'd be working late again, I smiled warmly and said, Of course, Melissa. Just don't overwork yourself. Because she didn't know it yet, but her every move was now being recorded, documented, and timed, by the man she thought was too naive to notice. And soon she'd find out what happens when an architect decides to demolish what he built with his own hands. Melissa's laughter still echoed in the hallway when the door closed behind her. The sound used to warm me, now it sounded hollow like a recording played through broken speakers. I waited until I heard her car back out of the driveway before I stood and pulled out the folder Lewis had given me the night before. The photographs were already creased from the number of times I'd handled them. I looked at each one again not because I needed more proof, but because I needed to measure my own restraint. Every time I looked at her face in those pictures, smiling up at Ryan, I reminded myself, don't confront. Don't explode. Build. In the quiet that followed, I began to rearrange my life with the precision of someone drafting a new blueprint. I moved small amounts of money from our joint account into one of the trusts under my name. I called my lawyer, casual as always, asking him to review some documents for a new property project. When he asked if Melissa should be included in the paperwork, I said she'd be busy for a few weeks. That was the second foundation stone of my plan, quiet withdrawal. By the time she realized something was off, everything that was ours would already be mine again. At work, I stayed late under the pretense of deadlines. My colleagues saw a man devoted to his craft. What they didn't see was me printing copies of contracts and storing them in a private drawer at the firm. Melissa's name was on half of them, my own choice when I thought love was partnership. I'd fix that one line at a time. Nights became a strange theater. I'd pour her a glass of wine when she returned from work, listen to her stories, nod in all the right places. She'd lean against the counter, her eyes bright, her phone face down beside her. Every vibration was a small dagger she hoped I wouldn't notice. Once, she laughed at something on the screen and I asked lightly, "Who's making you smile like that?" She didn't flinch. "Claire sent a meme," she said. "Smooth. Practiced." I almost admired the performance. "Claire's got a good sense of humor," I replied. My tone was easy, gentle. She believed it. That's how I knew I was winning, because she thought I hadn't changed. The first real crack appeared a week later. She came home to find her laptop missing from the living room. "I moved it," I said before she could ask. "Thought it'd be safer in your study." What I didn't tell her was that I'd already mirrored the contents onto an external drive. Most of her conversations with Ryan were deleted, but not all. There was one video, 30 seconds long, recorded in a hotel room. She was laughing, telling him, "Daniel still has no idea." Ryan's reply was a whisper, "He's too busy designing houses to notice you're building one with me." That night I took my wedding ring off for the first time in 12 years. I placed it on my desk, right beside the video drive. The gold caught the light from the desk lamp, a tiny sun spinning across the wood. It didn't hurt, it only felt final. Over the next few days I started planting small seeds of doubt in her mind, quiet, invisible traps meant to unravel her confidence. "Did you change your perfume?" I asked once. "It smells different." She froze, then smiled quickly. "New bottle," she said. "Same scent." Another time I mentioned casually, "Ryan's name came up at the firm today. He's working on a project similar to ours." Her spoon paused over her coffee just long enough for me to notice. "Oh, I didn't know that," she murmured. "Line number 50 at least." I began documenting everything, her tone, her patterns, her calls, the late returns. Not because I needed more evidence, but because I wanted precision when the end came. I wanted every line of my letter to be undeniable. Sometimes when I couldn't sleep, I thought about the moment she'd see that letter. The courtroom, the silence that would follow, the way Ryan's smirk would finally falter. I imagined the words I'd written burning through her calm facade, the way truth does when it's been buried too long. And through it all, I kept smiling, playing the role of the loving husband. Because sometimes revenge doesn't start with fire. Sometimes it starts with patience, the kind that waits quietly in the dark, measuring every beam before it brings the house down. The following Friday, Melissa came home glowing. She dropped her bag on the counter, humming a tune I hadn't heard before, the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne clinging to her jacket. I watched her from across the kitchen, studying the way her movements were light, almost careless. That's what guilt does after it festers long enough. It starts to look like freedom. I poured her a glass of wine before she could ask. "Good day?" I said. "The best," she replied, eyes bright. "We just closed a huge deal." My boss was thrilled. I smiled faintly. "Ryan must be proud too, huh?" She froze for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable but enough. "Ryan. Didn't you say he's part of your team?" I asked, feigning confusion. "All right. Yeah, he is," she said quickly, sipping her wine. "Why?" I shrugged. "Just wondering who gets the credit when you close a deal like that." She laughed, but it came out thin. "You think too much, Daniel." I let the silence linger. She didn't notice how hard I was studying her face, or how my heart was pounding with every lie she told. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was fascinated. She was improvising her own downfall, one careless detail at a time. Later that night, while she showered, her phone lit up again. "Ryan, you looked incredible today. Couldn't take my eyes off you." I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I simply memorized the timestamp. 8:13 p.m. That was exactly the moment she'd been telling me about her big presentation. I stepped outside, the cold air biting through my shirt. I needed the space to think, to keep my anger from spilling over. Across the street, the neighbor's porch light flickered. Mr. Owens, the retired detective, sat out there reading a newspaper, same as always. We'd spoken a few times. His calm, analytical nature had always impressed me. That's when the next part of my plan began to take shape. "Evening, Daniel," he called out. "You look like a man with too much on his mind." "Something like that," I said. "You still keep that security system company of yours?" He chuckled. "I don't run it, but I still have connections." "Why?" I hesitated, then said, "Thinking of upgrading my home cameras. Maybe add some new ones inside for safety." Owens smiled knowingly. "Safety, huh? Sure. I'll get you a good deal." By the next day, 4 new cameras were installed, discreet, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. 2 in the living room, 1 near the staircase, and 1 in the corner of our bedroom. I told myself it was for proof, not revenge, but deep down, I knew I wanted to see the truth with my own eyes. Melissa didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care enough to look. She spent most of that weekend running errands, and I spent mine reviewing architectural drawings while the cameras recorded empty rooms and long silences. Until Sunday evening. I was in my study when the alert came through on my phone. Motion detected, bedroom. My heart stilled. She wasn't supposed to be home. I opened the feed. The screen flickered, then focused. Melissa stood there, and she wasn't alone. Ryan was with her. It was quick, careless, full of laughter and whispers I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. I didn't watch long. 10 seconds, maybe 15. That was enough. Enough to turn every suspicion into certainty. Enough to erase any trace of the man I used to be. I closed the laptop slowly, breathing through the numbness. For a moment I just sat there, hands trembling slightly. Then I poured another drink and opened the old notebook where I sketched my blueprints. Only this time I wasn't designing a building. I was designing a lesson, one that would leave her reputation, her lover, and her pride in ruins. Because if Melissa wanted to play with foundations, I'd show her what happens when the ground finally gives way. I learned early on that people rush toward certainty to soothe the small, sharp edges of doubt. They prefer a story that fits, no matter how false, because the unknown is heavier to carry than a lie. So I fed Melissa the story she wanted to hear while I prepared the one she would be forced to accept. I called my solicitor mid-morning under the guise of expanding a small development project. His voice was warm, distracted. He liked my projects because they were tidy, sensible things that didn't require drama. If you're serious about the new terrace, he said, we'll need to revise the share structure. I asked him to prepare the paperwork and to do it quietly. He knew my tendency to hide things for good reason. He didn't ask why. He'd seen me protect clients' assets for years. While he worked, I moved money. Not all at once. Architects aren't known for their flair but for their patience. Little transfers, benign in size, to a trust I'd set up years earlier and never mentioned. Funds that had looked joint on a bank statement were now the property of a firm name that meant little to anyone who didn't read the tiny print. I made telephone calls to ensure every line of paperwork looked ordinary. When Melissa asked later that evening if we should look into a holiday, I smiled and deferred, we'll see about that when the project closes. She nodded, oblivious. At the office, I let a whisper travel. Lewis, who'd once saved my servers from a catastrophic breach, took his cue and opened a channel to a reporter he owed a favor. Is it true Daniel's firm is on the brink? The message read. It wasn't true, but the rumor was a useful instrument. Within a day, a terse message appeared in an industry forum. Possible acquisition issues at my company. That was all it took. People live on headlines. They react before they verify. Melissa took the bait. She smiled at her phone, eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen since those early days when we were broke and fearless. Mark fed her small comforts at his side, compliments that felt like flattery and were really scaffolding. The more frightened the market became, the more convinced she was that leaving me would secure her future. Her ambition, that old stubborn hunger born in the cramped flats of her youth, had always been her compass. Now it pointed toward escape. You should speak to a solicitor, Mark murmured once over coffee, close enough for me to hear when I walked past the cafe window. If his firm collapses, you'll want to protect yourself. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't need to. The poison worked better slow. She would act out of fear, not malice. She'd think she was being prudent. At home, I kept performing the same acts I always had. A kiss when she left, a cup of coffee waiting on the counter, notes about the children's school lunches. They weren't ours. Life's small fabrications spare some people details that help them sleep. My restraint beamed like polished stone. I lived the ordinary so no one would suspect I was dismantling the extraordinary. I also built redundancies. Lewis copied emails and texts and cataloged receipts. Mr. Owens from across the road calibrated the cameras so footage would be time-stamped and admissible. I made sure every digital breadcrumb could be followed to the precise second. I knew how slippery a screen can be. Paper and notarized transcripts bite differently. One evening Melissa announced, in a voice full of triumph, that she'd made an appointment with a divorce solicitor. It's just a precaution, she said, as if she were opening a window to let fresh air into a stale room. Mark squeezed her hand under the table like a conspirator. I watched them from the doorway with a slow, courteous smile that had been polished by a dozen rehearsed dinners. Do what you must, I said. If this is what you want, we'll make it easy. She laughed then, a sound of victory that made my throat tighten with something that was not anger, it was pure, clinical clarity. She believed she had won before the match even started. That conviction is the kind you can exploit. When she left that night for a drink with Mark, she kissed my cheek and murmured, "Don't wait up." I didn't. I stayed awake and watched the ledger of my life fall into place. The transfers confirmed, the rumors seeding the gullible, the cameras aligned. The scaffolding was set. The demolition could begin at any exact, measured moment I chose. When Melissa finally filed, she did it on a Monday, a lawyer's favorite day for delivering bad news. The envelope arrived just after 9, embossed with a firm's name that screamed prestige more than compassion. I opened it at my desk, the way one might open a letter from a friend who's already decided not to be one anymore. The language was crisp, almost surgical. Irreconcilable differences, petition for equitable distribution, full financial disclosure required. Mark's fingerprints were all over it. He had guided her hand with confidence, whispering that I would fold, that I'd pay to keep things quiet. I could almost hear his voice echo in her mind. "He won't fight you, Melissa. He's too proud for scandal." They were counting on the same quiet restraint that had always made me dependable. What they didn't understand was that silence is not surrender, it's strategy. I called her that evening. My voice was calm, deliberate. "I received the papers," I said. She sounded almost relieved. "Daniel, it's better this way. We've both changed." "I agree," I replied, letting the quiet stretch long enough for her to mistake it for acceptance. "Let's just do this right." That night I sent a message to Lewis. "Begin the upload when I text you one word, truth." He replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. We both knew what that meant. A week passed. The tension grew thicker, quieter. Melissa became almost kind again, offering me dinner, asking if I'd spoken to a lawyer. She was trying to manage guilt, to make this easier on her conscience. Guilt, after all, is easier to carry when the person you've hurt doesn't bleed. I played along. One evening, I suggested we meet at the same restaurant where I'd first seen her with Mark. "One last meal," I said. "To end things gracefully." She hesitated, then smiled, a flicker of nostalgia softening her face. "All right. One last meal." When we arrived, the lights shimmered low across polished tables, and that same jazz track hummed faintly in the background. It was almost poetic, the stage of betrayal transforming into the theater of reckoning. Mark was there too, of course. He sat at the bar, pretending surprise when he saw us. "Didn't expect to see you two together," he said with a grin that tried to look innocent. I nodded politely. "Life's full of surprises." I ordered wine. Melissa smiled weakly, and I noticed her hand tremble slightly when she reached for her glass. For the first time she looked uncertain. Maybe she sensed something off, or maybe she was just realizing that her clean break wasn't as clean as she'd imagined. Midway through dinner her phone buzzed. A notification lit up her screen, from an unknown number. She glanced at it, frowned, and then froze. The color drained from her face. "What's wrong?" I asked, my tone flat. She didn't answer. The screen showed an image, her and Mark, sitting at that very table weeks ago, hands intertwined, the same smirk on his face. The caption beneath read, "When she said, 'We're just friends.'" Another message followed instantly, "More coming soon." Mark's expression shifted from smug to pale. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Melissa looked at me, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Daniel, what's happening?" I leaned back, calm, composed, watching them unravel under the weight of exposure. "I told you," I said softly, "we should do this right." Behind my words, 1,000 small digital threads were unraveling across the city, the start of a meticulously timed storm. Lewis had begun the upload. Melissa's world was about to shatter, piece by piece, just as she had tried to dismantle mine. Melissa's face lost all its practiced poise. She tried to hold the glass steady, but her hand betrayed her, a faint clink as wine trembled against crystal. Around us, the restaurant's chatter dulled into background noise, a steady hum against the slow collapse of her composure. Mark, ever the opportunist, glanced at her phone again. Another buzz. Another photo. This one of them leaving a hotel, her hand clutching his sleeve. The time stamp and location unmistakable. She turned on him like a cornered animal. "You said no one saw us," she hissed. He raised his palms. I don't know where that came from." I said nothing. Silence can be louder than accusation. My phone vibrated once, discreetly, under the table. Lewis had sent the update, Phase 1 complete. I placed the device face down and gave them both a long, measured look. The curiosity, the panic, the denial, it was all theater now. "I suppose privacy isn't what it used to be," I said quietly. Melissa's eyes flicked to me, suspicious, desperate. You Did you do this? I smiled faintly. You're giving me too much credit. I'm just having dinner. She didn't believe me, of course. She was too smart for that. But she also didn't have proof, not yet. That uncertainty was my weapon. The mind breaks faster when it can't decide whether to fear or deny. When the third photo hit her phone, a screenshot of her private messages with Mark, time-stamped weeks before the "we're just friends" conversation, she dropped the device altogether. It clattered onto the marble floor, screen flashing bright. The text visible to everyone nearby. Melissa, he's pathetic when he tries to be kind. Mark, he's just useful until you're mine. Gasp. A waiter hesitated near our table, unsure whether to approach. A woman at the next table leaned closer to her partner, whispering. The whispers spread like smoke. Mark reached down to grab the phone, but I stopped him with a single glance, cold, deliberate. You might want to let her pick that up herself, I said. My voice was calm, but it carried something final. Melissa's face crumpled. She looked small, suddenly younger, as if the years of ambition had drained out of her in one heartbeat. Daniel, please, she whispered, voice cracking. Whatever this is, you don't have to. I already did nothing, I interrupted softly. That was my mistake. The restaurant manager approached, his professionalism bending under curiosity. Sir, is everything all right here? I nodded. Perfectly fine. I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and looked at Mark. You should probably get her home before someone recognizes you both from the photos. When I stepped outside, the cool air felt sharp, cleansing. Across the street, Lewis was in a parked car, the glow of his laptop screen faintly visible through the windshield. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. We didn't need words. The rest of the upload would go live in minutes. The emails, the shared accounts, the paper trail that would make it impossible for her to claim ignorance. By the time I got home, my phone was already buzzing with notifications. Anonymous accounts sharing screenshots. A gossip blog headline. Prominent architect's wife caught in affair with business partner. It spread faster than wildfire, just as planned. I didn't respond to any messages. I didn't need to. I poured myself a drink and sat in the quiet. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was precision. Every small, deliberate move had led here, to this measured unraveling. And yet, somewhere deep beneath the calm, a voice whispered, "You loved her once." I finished the glass. Love had nothing to do with it anymore. Justice was cleaner than forgiveness. By the next morning, the fallout had become impossible to ignore. Notifications flooded my phone. Screenshots, forwarded posts, screenshots of screenshots, each one carrying the weight of undeniable truth. Melissa had tried to salvage the narrative, posting vague statements about misunderstandings and personal matters, but every clarification was immediately contradicted by the evidence we'd released. Her carefully curated life was unraveling before the city, before her colleagues, before her own reflection. She came home mid-morning, eyes red from crying, hair slightly disheveled, her carefully composed facade gone. She stood in the doorway, hesitating as if the house itself might reject her. "Daniel?" she started, voice trembling. I didn't respond immediately. I watched her, the way a sculptor examines raw stone before making the first incision. I noted every detail, the slump of her shoulders, the trembling of her hands, the almost imperceptible bite of her lip. She had no idea what was coming next. I can explain, she stammered, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. I finally spoke, calm and deliberate. "Explain what, Melissa? The dinner dates? The hotel nights? The messages you thought I'd never see?" I let each phrase land softly, like stones tossed into still water. She flinched at every one, the ripples spreading across her face. "I made a mistake," she cried. "It meant nothing. It wasn't like." "It meant everything," I interrupted gently, almost kindly. "It meant you didn't value the life we built, the trust we shared. And now the world knows it too." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Please, Daniel. I can fix this." "Oh. You can't fix what's already here," I said, voice unwavering. "You can't undo the choices you made, or the trail of lies. But I can ensure the truth is clear, undeniable, and complete." For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes, the kind that had nothing to do with losing me, and everything to do with the exposure of her carefully guarded duplicity. She glanced at her phone, at the endless notifications, at the screenshots being shared faster than she could respond. Panic replaced arrogance, guilt replaced charm, and desperation replaced confidence. Mark appeared at the doorway, phone in hand, as if trying to salvage his own dignity, but his face fell when he saw me. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I let him stew. He thought he could play his part, but I had anticipated every move, every lie, every half-truth. He was powerless and he knew it. Melissa sank into the armchair, her hands covering her face. Daniel, please. I was wrong. You were always wrong, I said softly. Not just tonight, not just with him, but every time you chose deception over honesty. And now you'll live with the consequences. I walked over and placed the wedding photo we had in the hallway onto the table in front of her. The image captured our happiest moment, a bright, smiling day filled with promise. She looked at it and I saw the weight of regret settle in her chest. Every memory, every small kindness I had shown, every sacrifice, it had all been erased by her choices. She whispered almost inaudibly, I didn't think you'd ever. You underestimated me, I said. And that was your final mistake. At that moment I realized it wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was closure. Years of loyalty, patience, and restraint had led to this inevitability. I had engineered the exposure without cruelty, without rage, and without losing myself in anger. Outside, the world continued its hum, oblivious to the intimate collapse within our home. But inside, Melissa's empire of lies had crumbled, and I had built something stronger in its place: clarity, truth, and an unshakable sense of justice. The courtroom was quieter than I expected, the hush thick with anticipation. The walls of polished oak reflected the low sunlight streaming through the windows, catching the dust in the air like tiny golden particles suspended in time. Melissa walked in first, head held high, as if rehearsing a performance that she hoped would fool the world. Mark followed behind, his smirk gone, replaced with tension that made him look smaller somehow. I entered last, calm and composed, feeling the weight of every carefully laid plan settle into my chest like a solid structure. I didn't glance at them immediately. Instead, I placed my folder on the table, the leather cover smooth under my hand. Inside were months of documentation: receipts, emails, screenshots, the hotel photos, and every message that proved the facade she had built. It wasn't vengeance, it was undeniable truth. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce the room, looked at me. Mr. Carter? She asked. Yes, Your Honor, I replied. My voice carried easily across the chamber, measured, calm, in control. Melissa's attorney spoke first, trying to frame the narrative with rehearsed sympathy and legal jargon. But when I handed over the folder, the room shifted. The judge began reviewing the pages, her brow furrowing slightly with every turn. Photos, time-stamped messages, hotel invoices, each one a piece of the puzzle that Melissa and Mark had hoped would remain hidden. Then came the final piece, the letter. I had written it not as an accusation but as a chronology, a careful, clinical detailing of the betrayal. The judge read it aloud, every word precise, every act undeniable. Melissa's jaw dropped and Mark's face went pale. The courtroom seemed to breathe collectively, leaning in with curiosity, tension, and disbelief. I present this as evidence of deliberate deception, concealment, and breach of trust, I said. Not for punishment, but so that the truth is clear to all parties. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of shame and realization. The carefully constructed wall she had built around her lies crumbled, layer by layer, under the weight of documented reality. She looked at me as if searching for the man she had known, but found instead someone who had endured, observed, and calculated every move with precision. The judge's gavel struck once. Twice. Silence filled the courtroom. Based on the evidence presented, the court recognizes Mr. Carter's documentation and testimony. The petition for division is denied as outlined. Furthermore, all shared assets will remain under Mr. Carter's control. Gasps echoed around the room. Melissa's attorney opened his mouth, but the judge raised a hand. This matter is concluded. Melissa sank into her seat, the color drained from her face. Mark's expression was a mixture of disbelief and humiliation. The spectators, once curious onlookers, now leaned back, murmuring among themselves. Justice had been served quietly, methodically, without spectacle. I stepped forward slowly, looking at Melissa directly. You once told me we were just friends, I said, my voice low but steady. But I was never the one pretending. I merely let you reveal your own truth. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, the first genuine glance of recognition. Then she turned away, her world irrevocably changed. As I left the courtroom, the air outside felt crisp, clean, and heavy with relief. Months of patience, careful planning, and emotional restraint had led to this moment. I had not broken under anger or despair. I had not let her control the narrative. And in the end, the truth, methodical, undeniable and precise, had prevailed. Outside, the city carried on, unaware that a private empire of lies had just collapsed. But for me, Daniel Carter, it was not just closure. It was the affirmation that integrity, patience and measured action could rebuild a life even after betrayal. And the man who once believed in simple honesty had proven, in the most cinematic way possible, that truth could be the most devastating force of all. Subscribe, like, comment and share for more interesting stories.